Welcome one, welcome all, welcome to another episode of Fan Team Radio. I am your host Shayem Khan, joined as always by my co-host Chris Odorizzi. Chris, what's up?
Hey Shayem, how's it going, man?
Good, man.
Yeah, we just got done with this Miami GP over the weekend. First US race of the year. Go US. For the US fans, we had a 3.3 mile track. That's 5.4 kilometers. We had 57 laps. And all in all, it was I think it was a pretty good race.
It nothing exploded. The FIA didn't intervene. So yeah, I guess it was a race that came and went.
Yeah, I mean we so I watched a lot of the pre stuff, like some of the practices and quali, and there was a lot of talk about how the tarmac was repaved and everything, and there was no rubber. This track isn't something that gets used for like feeder series and things of that nature. So when quali happened and practice happened, there was crashes, people spinning, the wind gusts on the turn where Charles lost it twice. I mean, Charles crashed in practice and in quali, and he went into the wall. And I was expecting a complete disaster of a race because the night before it had rained, and usually when it rains, it washes all the rubber that's been laid down, and you have a fresh, clean track. And it's windy. It was super windy the day of the race, and I was expecting a disaster, and nothing happened. I mean, a decent race happened, but nothing disastrous happened. So
Yeah,
a
very
little,
sterile race.
yeah, very sterile race, and I can't tell if that's like a bad thing because we're not used to it. I think it's only the 12th. I don't know if I'm wrong about this. I think it's the only 12th race in Formula One history with no DNFs, which is kind of mind-boggling. There was like a span of time from like 1960 to 2004 where there was a DNF every single race. So it's kind of crazy to not have a single DNF, not even a yellow flag, not a red flag, anything. But there was some
I
decent
guess
racing.
I guess that pile up in Australia is kind of evening out all of the races that we've had recently where pretty much everyone's finishing. There's not a whole lot of on track commotion. So all in all, I guess the season's kind of evened out in terms of uh, really crazy racing, a lot of crashes, and then also races where really not a whole lot happens other than the race itself. Um, yeah, I thought about Miami in slightly different terms. There's not a whole lot of data that we have on this track, and I know that the historical data is something that teams always prepare with when they come onto a track, so they're able to, kind of anticipate what the rubber situation is going to be like if there are going to be exceeding temperatures or to anything to that effect. There's historical data for every track. Miami, this is only the second race that they've had, so I kind of thought about it in terms of how are they going to prepare for a track like this, especially knowing that with the weather from the night before and then the tarmac being re-rubbered. So yeah, I was also expecting a little bit of commotion, but here we have it. Everyone
Maybe
finished.
maybe everyone played it safe and they played it equally safe, so there was a little bit less, on the limit to create problems. But to go back to your point, and this is super random, when we were watching the race, they're talking about this, but this is the only second Miami GP. But they kept putting the stat up on the screen that said the last five US winners and the last five US pole sitters, and they were showing like the polls from the last five races, but not saying whether it was Coda or Miami, or so I think it was just such a very confusing um stat to put up on the screen for like people that aren't in the know that this is only the second race. And if you even go into the F1 app, they literally list all three US races as just the US Grand Prix, not like the Miami Grand Prix or the Austin Grand Prix or the Vegas Grand Prix. It just says the United States Grand Prix. And I think that's super confusing.
You
So
didn't know it was the United States of America? We're
the
just
United
one
States,
state.
we're just I think there's some very I, I I'm not sure if the FAA or whoever's in charge knows exactly how to handle the US, in terms of a marketing
Damn right they
standpoint.
don't. We don't even know how to handle ourselves.
Bingo.
It does go. It does. It is a funny perspective from the outside, kind of on America, right? It really shows. It really highlights the fact that we still need to be exposed to the world in a not so but not obnoxious way.
Right.
um yeah, I don't know. Miami, I think there's a lot more maturation that needs to happen, and I think that will only continue as the years go on. I'm sure you saw the Roger Federer, James Marsden hiccup.
Oh,
So
yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that was such a hilarious moment and such a US screw up in my mind. And I was just like, and the thing that made it the best is the smile from ear to ear that was on his face.
oh yeah,
Like I'm
it's like
Roger
he was in on
Federer.
the joke.
Yeah,
It's like he
yeah.
was in on the
It's
joke.
like he was prepared for it, but it was just so randomly weird. And I don't know. I just thought it was hilarious. But yeah, I
You
think
gotta
like
love
you
it.
said, there's some maturing that needs to happen through US Formula One and the way they present themselves and tracks. So and we'll get more about that a little bit later. I have some talking
Yeah,
points, but
because they don't ever say the European Grand Prix and here are all
yeah,
the winners from the past European. It's it's growing
like
pains here.
I understand that the US is a country and we're defined as a country, but we could be sort of looked at as the same as like the EU. Like, like if you look at like France as a state or Germany as a state, it's a country within a union, but that's kind of what the United States is, a bunch of states within a union of states. So yeah, I think we should just say the Texas Grand Prix or the Austin Grand Prix, the Miami, and be a
The
little bit
thing is,
more
there's only
defined.
three races in the US. How hard is it to just differentiate those three? What happens when we add on a couple of more to the US circuit, you know?
Which is actually interesting because a lot of people hate the fact that there's three races in the US because in that scenario, they talk about how we're a country. And they're like, no, because like, for instance, Logan Sargent has three home races, technically, right? And there's a lot of drivers on the grid that don't even have one home race, but he gets three because they define it as, but if you look at it, he only really has one home race, which is Florida, because I think he's from Fort Lauderdale. But
Yeah.
um it's just like, yeah, we need to figure out US logistics with Formula One.
They need to
Um,
figure out logistics worldwide because they're about to head to Italy in 2 weeks, which makes absolutely no sense. But, they're trying to save the world, Chris,
I think
and
they're
save
trying
on
to.
fuel.
Yeah, I think they're trying to, honestly, but um, I think they're getting a lot of pushback from track owners and people who have planned yearly events around these things. Like people are used to traveling and things of that nature. So I'm curious to see what they're able to accomplish next year. But yeah, it is
Yeah, I mean,
it's a bold task for the Formula One to try to be saving the world, but good on them, I
hey,
guess.
as long as they say it loud enough, we'll believe it.
Yeah, of
Cool.
course.
So let's get into the race today, Chris. So Red Bull again, just dominating, but specifically Max dominating the grid. And seems like he has no plans of stopping. Barring any on-track incidents or accidents, he'll probably run away with this. And it, you know, hell of a race for the guy, coming back from as many places as he did, and then not just overtaking Checo, but putting what I think like 13, 14 seconds on top of that.
Yeah.
Just a runaway horse here. It made me think, Chris, about some of the undisputable dynasties in American sports. You have your 90s Bulls, your 2010s, Golden State Warriors, you have, your Red Sox. And and the reason I point that out is because there's a certain reverence that American fans have for dynasties, whether you love them or you hate them. It does kind of propel these sports, and adds a storyline to it that keeps the sport strong. I'm curious, Chris, do you think in F1 it has the same effect, or do you think having such a dominant force dilutes the competitive nature of the sport?
Um, that's a good point. It's interesting because it's a difficult thing for me to answer being a newer fan to Formula One. And from my understanding, this is not the first time this has happened. Obviously, Mercedes had a long span of dominance and they had multiple years that were similar. I think I saw a stat. So I saw a stat yesterday that said like it was like 400 laps led by Red Bull this year and like 16 laps led by every other team combined. But I saw a similar stat from Mercedes a few years ago where they had in the first like 10 races was like 400 laps, 450 laps led, and the rest of the team combined were very small, like under 20 or whatnot. And so this isn't the first time this kind of dominance has happened in the sport. Um, and so obviously the sport has thrived through other situations such as this. But ultimately, I do think that it doesn't carry the same weight as other sports for a variety of reasons. The biggest one in mind is that when you have a dominant team, they're not playing in every game. Like everyone races in Formula One, you get to watch different, like you get to watch a Browns versus the Lions game in football, and you still get to watch two people kind of on equal grounding compete. And we have that a little bit in Formula One when back markers are racing each other, when Yuki's fighting Oscar or so on and so forth. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if they're in 11th place or worse, it's for no points. And it's uninteresting to watch, and therefore it doesn't make TV coverage. And it's kind of uninteresting from a spectator. I actually think that they should try to put points into almost every finishing position to make the year more enjoyable to watch from a competitive standpoint, all the way to the back of the grid. So I do think that um, like one team completely dominating and just knowing that unless an engine blows up, they're going to win, it does kind of hinder the sport. I think you're always going to have your diehards, your legacy Formula One fans, but these new fans that came in from the sort of the epic Drive to Survive era, I think they're going to get disinterested real quick after the variance and disparity from 2021 season, which was, unprecedented according to most long-term F1 fans.
Yeah, I think I love a good dynasty, right? That I really do believe that it having a solid dynasty and then having another one that takes over, and letting every team get a chance to have their shot at a dynasty is something that has been in American sports for a really long time. I think the effect is lost when the teams are on such uneven footing. In the NFL, the NBA, MLB, you have a cost cap that you have to adhere to. Obviously, in the MLB, it's a little bit different, where you can, buy out these stud, contracts. But they're trying to, equalize that as well. So you do have the carousel is a little bit more even handed, whereas in F1, Williams did have a span of dominating, and then McLaren had a span of dominating, but those other teams that that are up for contention, they kind of get forgot about, you know and they don't really get a chance to go in there and disrupt a dynasty. Like for example, the Rockets disrupting the Chicago Bulls 90s era, right? They came in the middle and picked up 2 championships while MJ was out. They had the opportunity to do that. It doesn't seem like that's the case in F1. It seems like a dynasty kind of just happens year over year without any kind of ability for another team to come in and capture a year or two in between, keeping things interesting. So
Yeah.
you are having these like 6-7 years of Ferrari dominating, and then McLaren dominating, and then Mercedes dominating, then Red Bull dominating, and then what about Alpha Tori? Like what about Alfa Romeo? What about all these like other, Alpine? They're kind of just gonna stay stuck in that washer cycle of history of like irrelevance. So yeah, I gave it a lot of thought because Max's dominance, especially in this race, just illustrates what it looks like to, I don't even know how you bet on this in Vegas. I don't even know what the
Yeah.
line would be to bet for Max and Checo. Like if they're an undisputed winner, like what's the payout for that even? So that, it is something to hats off to Red Bull. They did what they needed to do. I wish Checo would have won this race, to keep things a little bit more interesting, but Max won, and now, the delta between him and Checo is almost insurmountable, I feel like. And Does it strengthen or weaken F1? I definitely think right now it weakens F1, especially like you said for newer audiences. But it does have the potential to kind of get to where these other sports are in terms of like getting the playing field a little bit more equal, maybe restructuring how points are administered. Um, yeah, I just think like going into every race and thinking that it's going to be, what did I say earlier, ver per allo.
Yeah.
If those are going to be the three acronyms at the top of every single screen, and it just kind of takes away from the season. So, yeah. Anything else that you have on the Red Bull piece, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I full agree with everything you just said. Like, I really, I really want the FAA to take a look at the regulations and the adjustments they made, because they designed these new regs about trying to get the cars to race closer. Um, and they designed them to have these ground effect cars. And then the we had the porpoising issue last year, which created a lot of systematic issues with bouncing and porpoising and potential injury errors for the drivers, like you saw when Lewis would have his back hurt and things of that nature. So they had to adjust the regs to raise the ride height of the cars, effectively erasing the intent behind the regulations and creating it more difficult for the cars to follow as close and things of that nature. And we saw that a lot in Baku. We saw a lot of drivers making up a lot of time on the driver ahead and then just kind of puttering out when they got into the dirty air behind the car. So I think if they're able to try to figure these things out, we can get a little bit more tighter racing and maybe close the gap. But yeah, I mean, Red Bull is going to dominate. They're going to dominate this year, and especially Max. When, like, as soon as we saw that double overtake on, who was it? Was it Sainz and K Mag, or was it Leclerc and K Mag? I think
I think it was Leclerc and K-Mag.
yeah. So, but either way, it was like watching Max Verstappen playing a Formula One video game on easy mode. Like, he literally just shot. I mean, to be fair, they were fighting each other, and Max got a good exit and all that, but it's just that
I mean,
DRS.
it's a hot knife through butter,
Yeah,
with that
it,
car.
when you watch that happen, you were just like, "There's just no shot." Um, and the other thing that we could talk about later, but like the whole tire situation, like Max was putting in fast laps on 40 lap old hards. Like, I don't just don't even know what to think about that. Like, I would like I just couldn't believe it. Like, Checo had pit for new hards. He was on 20 lap old hards. Max was on 40 lap hards and just putting in way faster laps than Checo was. At that moment,
Yeah,
I knew it was over. So
I actually didn't agree with pitting Checo as early as they did. I think he still had life left in his tires that he was going to be able to manage and probably extend that gap with Max. Not to say that Max wouldn't have won anyways. I mean, the guy put up like a 14-second difference out front, but I think Checo went into this or Red Bull went into this race with the strategy that favored Max. I think Checo had to kind of concede to that, knowing that even though he was starting at the front of the pack, that it was probably going to be a race that Max is going to end up winning. But we could talk about Red Bull all day, right?
yeah.
Let's turn our attention to another team that has a little bit more interesting skew to it. So Aston Martin, they split the entire grid almost in Miami with Fernando placing in P3, Lance in P12. Let's go back to it, Chris. Do you think Lance is a suitable D2 for Aston Martin?
Well, I got 2 points to make about this. One, there was so much slight back to Red Bull for 1 second, and the fact that I heard from a lot of people that Max has to have a different car. Max has to have the engineers giving him some special juice or turning down Checo's car because it was just so divided. And I was like, if that's the case, then I guess Lance's dad is giving him a crappy car because Fernando was just that much pacier than him. And I think if this is the year for anybody to wake up and realize that Lance might not be suitable for Formula One, it's probably going to be this year, because Fernando is completely putting him to shame in most races. And I don't know if you
He's
heard
coaching.
this.
He's coaching him
He's
halfway
coaching.
through the. Yeah.
He's like watching him on TV, giving him pointers. And bravo, and maybe that's why Lawrence brought him on. He's like, teach my son how to be a good driver.
I mean, the
But
amount of bandwidth that man has to be able to stay in the top three race while also being cognizant of what Lance is doing and giving him pointers. I mean,
but you also heard, I mean, I heard, I don't know if you did, that Lance was like yelling at his engineer over team radio, being like,
yeah,
can you give
to
me what's
some
going on?
information or
Yeah,
something
just
like that.
anything. Like, and it almost sounds like they've kind of written him off, and they know that they have Fernando being in the hot seat and capable of putting podiums up. And so they're focusing on his race and just being like letting Lance do his thing. And so, yeah, like I think it's clear that Lance is never going to dominate the sport. And he's obviously, even though if he's a decent driver, but he's getting older, and he doesn't have that fight in him like someone like Fernando does. So I think at some point they do have to ask themselves, do we want to win championships, or do we want my son to drive Formula One? And I think that question needs to be answered.
Yeah. So at what point do you think Aston Martin will have to start seriously considering offering the D2 positions to more talented drivers? I mean, there's talks of Charles potentially leaving Ferrari. Mercedes is doubling down on, getting Lewis on another contract, so that door might be shut to Charles. Um, at what point do you envision Aston Martin having to make that decision to move into a new driver?
I think if they're ever going to make it, it's going to be um, for next year. I don't think that. I think if a driver shakeup is going to happen, it's going to happen sooner than later, because if they give Lance, I don't know how Lance is. Maybe I could look it up in a second, but he could probably sit in that seat for another 5 years if they have no intention of getting rid of him. In which case they could definitely miss out on a potential championship, because if you have someone like Charles in the second seat, like you mentioned, and they're putting up double podiums, maybe the gap closes a little bit next year, and Red Bull's the gap is much closer, and you have an Alonso Charles pairing, they could easily fight for the championship. So I definitely think it has to be over silly season this year that these kind of things are being discussed.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it one more year. I think if Lewis were to leave Mercedes and there was confirmation on that, then the shakeup might put Lance in a compromised position with the what do you call it, the musical chairs of F1 drivers. But given that, Toto has kind of pronounced that they're going to try to get Lewis on another contract, um, I just think that Lance will probably skid by one more year. I think they'll let Fernando shine this year and next year, but I do think at some point early next year, if Lance isn't producing podiums consistently and in fact is jeopardizing Constructor Cup potential for Aston Martin, he probably will get the boot, like the most gentle, loving boot that any driver's ever gotten. Probably a severance package too.
Yeah,
Um,
here's $10 million, a fancy car, a yacht. Go have some fun.
yeah, and
You know,
we won't drag you through the mud like we did with Danny Rick.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna give it until probably mid next season for them to determine if Lance is gonna stay on or if they're gonna have to pivot into a new D2.
Who's your top three to take that seat?
That's a great question, Chris. Um, I really do like Alex Albon for that seat. I think what he's been able to kind of be the buoy for Williams. And I say that in a good and a bad way. Good in the sense that, he's essentially kind of leading the team that really doesn't have any potential for winning anytime soon. Um, and he's matured since, I started watching F1 back in 2019. Or started watching consistently. And I think that package of maturity, being able to lead a team, but also kind of his humility and how he is as a driver and kind of being able to plug into a system and play, that all works, I think, for the D2 position at Aston Martin. Is stable, he's talented, he learns quickly. I really do love Alex for that seat. Um, Depending on how the Ferrari situation shakes out, I don't know if Charles is okay with being a D2 anywhere. But maybe if it's a situation where it's with Fernando and he's, almost on his way out, and then he can kind of come in as D2 and then elevate to D1, I think that would be a good fit for Charles and for Aston Martin. And number three, for some reason, I want to say Carlos Sainz. I think he, when we talked about this before, I think he is a capable driver. He's a very, very talented driver. I don't think he is a franchise driver, not someone that you build a team around. But I think if you want a capable driver in there who, another Spaniard just like Alonso so, you can play up that marketing side as well. And you can have at least something stable going into the following seasons. I would say Lando, but just given the lucrative contract that he signed at McLaren and kind of his he's already mentioned a few times that he's going to stick with McLaren, that he's like, vested in what they're going to want to do. I don't really see him moving anytime soon. I think he will probably stay through it for a couple of years at McLaren, especially after they took on Oscar, and they don't really, they haven't really put up any kind of performance. And we'll talk about McLaren a little bit more later. But yeah, I think for me right now, Alex Albon, Charles, and Carlos Sainz are good fits for that D2 position at Aston Martin. What about you?
I think we just have to look at who's ready to leave and who's ready to be in a fast car. So that's got to be Charles. I know that Ferrari is a legacy thing for them, for both him and Carlos. It's like driving for Ferrari is like an honor, and everybody wants to do it. But I think at some point he wants to win championships if possible. So if Ferrari can't get it together this year, I think he would be looking to jump ship. And then, just like you said, I think Lando, as much as he has committed to McLaren in the past, I think he is, if he had the opportunity, would highly consider it. And I think Lawrence can handle the lucrative part. So, and then my third one would be Oscar. I think Oscar considers himself a generational talent, or at least he's been touted as such. Has that potential to be, and he's a rookie that could prove himself to be the George Russell rookie caliber, Charles Leclerc caliber. So if that seat was open and nobody else wanted it, he could potentially slot in. And I'm guessing he has a 1-year deal with McLaren, so that could be there for him. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
like you
it's
said,
not a bad thought. It's not a bad thought.
Lance could be there for forever. Maybe he's gone this year, maybe next year. But I think if they want a serious chance at winning a championship, that's going to have to change.
Yeah. Cool. So let's take a look at a team that we haven't really discussed heavily yet, but they made the newsstands this week. Mixed feelings for Alpine, Chris. They were able to get points. Pierre and Esteban were able to kind of get in one after another this week. But Lauren Rossi, the team CEO, has made some really strong statements disparaging the team's position early on in the season. To quote, he says, "It's disappointing. It's actually bad. This year ended up starting with a flawed performance and flawed delivery. It's obvious our position in the standings is not worthy of the resources we spent, and we are quite far, in fact, very far from this year's end goal." And that's him talking to French channel Canal Plus. Strong words from the CEO. What do you think about Alpine's near future and down the road future?
Yeah, I mean, this sport is tough. Like, this is expensive sport. anybody getting involved, putting money behind development, engineering, cars, drivers, and at the max of its popularity, when all eyes are on it, it's got to be tough to put so much investment behind an idea and just watch it not perform to the ability that you envisioned. And I think, not everyone can be Red Bull. Not everyone can win every race. And there's still Mercedes and the Ferraris of the world. And so it's difficult to get up there. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with Alpine. Like, obviously there was a shakeup with them, with Alonso, with Oscar. There's obviously some inner things that aren't necessarily fully public that maybe make the cohesion internally not jive to the fact where they can actually put all the pieces together to win a race or win a championship, or just have a well-oiled machine, so to speak, on both ends. So yeah, it's a difficult thing, because we did see a lot of potential in them. But I remember at the beginning of the year, we were super hopeful for them, and we thought that they would perform very well. We thought Gasly was a good choice. Yeah, it's just kind of difficult, and I agree. Like, if you're the CEO of a company and you're not hitting your goals, you're going to be upset. And it kind of, they got points this weekend, but it wasn't that many. So hopefully they can get up there and perform.
Yeah, if you can recall in this latest season of Drive to Survive, the conversation and the storyline between, Otmar and Laurent Rossi, it seemed like it was all positive, especially their rapport with each other. But in my time in watching the sport, I also have come to realize that it's a really big top-down mentality and culture. And Otmar, as good of a team principal as he is, I think he does have some softness around those edges. And I think to be the top tier, team principals, you do need to be a little bit more prudent, a little bit more edgy, really be demanding of your organization and your drivers, and really setting that pace, but also nurturing them. I think that's kind of the most talented team principals, I think, have that. I think Mike Crack is a really good example of someone who is now put in that position, and really showing that leadership quality that's needed. So I think the contention between Otmar's maybe, you know, uh, probably a little bit more easygoing demeanor, and the demand that Laurent Rossi has as a CEO are butting heads at this point. And I think, it's not a lost cause that, they got points. They're definitely trajecting slowly up into the right. But I get, the frustrations coming from leadership there. And I'm not going to put Otmar on my hot seat just yet. I think he still has some runway to prove himself and to right the ship. But if this continues into the next couple of races, I definitely see Otmar, being put on some sort of hot seat situation, and really being held accountable in a really public way by Laurent Rossi.
Yeah, I definitely think he needs. I full agree with you that he has some give still, some slack, but they went through that whole Oscar situation, where he thought he had him in the bag, and then I don't know whether he felt like he didn't have to get everything signed on the dotted line, and it was just all going to work out. But yeah, there's definitely something that is missing there, and he's going to have to button up a little bit if he wants to keep his position. And
Yeah.
then, just the drivers, like Pierre's had a lot of chances. Um,
He actually had a really good start to the race. I thought he was going to probably finish P5 or even higher up the ladder. I think it's after he had his pit stop where he kind of fell further down, and luckily Esteban was able to come in and kind of clean up and make sure that they stayed both in points. So all in all, a good week for Alpine. But in terms of where we expected them to stack up against the competition, they're still kind of far away from that mark.
Yep, totally agree.
Cool. So let's talk about winners, losers, and the hot seat, Chris. Who you got
Yeah.
for your winners this week?
Um, I think big winner everyone's expecting. It's just Max. He's had a couple of let's say very small road bumps with qualification issues. The red flag came out. It just proved that he has everything once again that it's going to take to just to be a three-time champion and a generational driver. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a moment on the broadcast or a picture where he like pointed at the number one on his car, like just insinuating like that's me. I'm number one.
I'm that man.
I'm the
Yeah.
man. Like, all you Checo lovers, you think it just hopes and dreams gone right now. Just just be done with it. And then Alonso, I'll never get tired of seeing that guy on the podium, smiles cheek to cheek. And he's been on the podium 4 out of 5 races. I think he's scored 15 points every single race. Because he missed the podium, but he scored points in the sprint race. So I think he's had 15 points every single race, and that consistency is going to lead to big points, and he's going to either get P2 or P3 in the championship, depending on Checo's performance for the rest of the year. Um, so maybe eventually the P3s will get old, but I'm so happy for the guy.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with you. You know, Max just did the thing today. And it's hard to dispute his excellence right now, even if it's a matter of the car being excellent. You know, you still need to put that car in place, and he did that today. I love seeing Fernando on the podiums. I think the sport's in a better place when he's on podiums. I'm gonna add two more to my winner circle. I'm gonna add Yuki and K Mag.
For sure.
I think Yuki again. I think he missed the points just by a little bit this week, but given how bad Nick DeVries is doing, I think Yuki has at least consistently been in that 9 to 11 position, which is, all things considered for that team and for Yuki himself. I think it's a positive. So even though he didn't score points today, he was able to kind of stick in that range, that might have been ambitious last year, but this year's it kind of seems like that's his place, and he's going to fight to keep those in the upcoming races. And then with K Mag too, he had an excellent qualifying race, was able to kind of stick it in relatively in the same location for the race day as well. Outperformed his teammate Hulkenberg, who I thought had a pretty good start to the race, but the strategy of going into lap 40 with your hard tires just doesn't work the same way for Haas that it does for Red Bull. So yeah, I'm gonna give K-Mag my hats off. I'm gonna give Yuki my hats off. And then obviously, the biggest hat goes to Max.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh
I'll agree with you. Like, I'm super happy that Yuki continues to perform. I'm still trying to decide where he is. Like, does he deserve a top seat, or is he kind of a middle of the road driver? I think time will tell, but he's definitely outperforming his teammate this year, and probably deserves to be in either a better AlphaTauri or a better car than AlphaTauri. So, and yeah,
yeah.
and Haas had a decent weekend as well. K Mag was obviously not going to hold onto the upper echelons of the race, but they performed well, and yeah, he's still driving his heart out. So, I would fully agree with you.
Yeah. Good things for Haas this year. They're not running into the walls every other race. So incrementally, I can see improvements across several of these teams. So we'll see where that takes us. Let's talk about losers, Chris. Who do you got for your losers this week?
Yeah, this might be a little surprising, but Sergio, like, if you're pole and you're in clean air and you can't take that to a victory with no flags, yellow, red, anything, then you did something very, very wrong. And I think you need to have a like obviously you can get the setup wrong, or you can have some bad tire dag or whatever it is, but you shouldn't be that much out of the game. And I think for him, second place is almost losing in that respect, because you should be able to convert a pole position with that much gap. So, I mean, Max still had to navigate back markers, Max still had to go up the field. And there's, whether you're faster or not, there's still time lost when you're battling cars. So Sergio should have been able to pull ahead, and he just didn't. And yeah, so I think he should have done better, and he had all the chances to continue his win streak and just couldn't. So I think that's a wake up call for him. And then Lance for
Harsh
almost,
words from Chris.
yeah, and almost. I mean, I love Sergio. I want him to win the championship. It's just not going to happen in my eyes. And then Lance, like Lance, this for the same reasons. If you have your teammate putting it up on the podium and you're in P12 and nothing has happened in the race, then that P12 is on merit. That's you being bad, or not bad, but worse at driving than your teammate, and this should be on all merit. I think the fact that we had no flags is a good, determining factor of where these people should be, because that's all pure merit based driving. So, yeah, those are my big losers for the day, just because they got outperformed by their teammates so badly.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you on the Lance piece. I think, you know, and you make a good point, without any red flags, with a clean race, you're able to see a little bit more, or you're able to discern a little bit easier which drivers are better based on merit. And yeah, the delta between Lance and Fernando is like I said, is a cause for concern, but they have a lot of good things to kind of propel them past that.
Right.
I would say my loser for this week is Logan. Uh, you know, Dead last in qualifying, dead last in the race. He had that front wing, issue right off the bat, and it's his home race. I do feel bad for the guy, but not too bad since he's an F1 driver.
Yeah.
He had I think he jokingly had said, he wishes this race was a couple of, further down the line this season, so he'd at least have a couple of races under his belt. But that's no excuse. I think coming in dead last, and not just dead last, but 20 seconds, to who was ahead of him, Piastri, who also didn't have
Oscar.
a great season. Yeah,
Yeah.
it just, that was, they both got lapped. It just wasn't a good look. I think Logan is probably going to take the biggest L for me this week, just given the fact that he was at his real home turf. Maybe if this was like in Austin or something like that, I probably wouldn't be so hard on him because he's still a rookie. But yeah, disappointing stuff this week from Logan.
Yeah, it's got to be hard to be a rookie and get P20 in front of your home fans, your local heroes and everything. They want to see you do well, and sort of be that voice of American drivers in F1. And but I mean, he did have wing damage, so that did put him way back, and without any flags to close the gap, it's kind of understandable. But still, yeah, I mean, um, sometimes you have bad days. It's just unfortunate. And yeah, I mean, I think he's still one to watch for the year. But yeah, I mean, what can you say? He got 20th. He got lapped. Had a bad weekend. So I'm not gonna disagree with the big L column on him. So
No.
feel bad for the guy, like you said. But
At least he's not in the hot seat. Who is
yeah,
in the hot seat, Chris?
it's got to be McLaren. I mean, we had so much hype. I don't know who it was, Zach Brown or the entire department. They were just saying we're bringing a whole new car to Azerbaijan, and bringing all these upgrades, and it just hasn't done anything. And for these guys to finish like way at the back of the grid, like where do they finish? 17th and 19th,
Yeah.
like McLaren, even with the Danny Rick was performing better, and they won a race 2 years previously with Danny, and like they have gone nowhere but backwards. And it might just be all the weight from the sponsors on the car, all that paint weighs it down. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw it, but they had on the Velo sponsorship or whatever it is, they had like the Surgeon General warning like right on the side of the car because I guess it's like a nicotine vape pen or whatnot. And I was like, oh man, how much? The thought actually went through my head. I was like, how much weight is that adding to the car? Because yeah,
I,
but yeah, like McLaren, something has to change, and if they already brought upgrades, that means that they probably don't have any new upgrades coming anytime soon. So, it looks like they're going to be kind of where they are. Like it might be slightly track dependent, but I don't see them fighting for major points anytime soon. So something has to change. Engineers, Zach, the team principal, something has to change in order for them to get back, because they were so dominant for so long, and they were performant, and Lewis's old team. I just don't know where it all fell apart.
yeah, I think I have them in my hot seat too. They're the epitome this year of over promise, under deliver. And they have two really good drivers. So I think the least common denominator here across seasons is Zach. And the leadership that he's, hired around him, they're not getting McLaren to the promised land. They're not even getting up into a progressive like improvements year over year. They're kind of like either sunk where they're at and then slowly sinking a little bit deeper while, pulling at a thread. So yeah, I think McLaren, I don't know what the answer is, quite honestly. I thought they were gonna have a really good car going into this year. They didn't meet any of their performance expectations. This might just be me being naive. I thought that they'd have enough turnaround time by this race to get back into at least, consistent like P8s, P9s. But that just hasn't happened, and I'm curious to see what the tolerance is for the board members there to keep Zach on as the CEO.
Yeah, I will say that if we go into next year with zero management or leadership positions in that team and no driver changes, I think I would be very worried for the future of McLaren. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll knock it out of the park next year, but it looks like all signs point to that not happening unless there's a major change.
Yeah, still a coveted brand, but I can see it turning into a Williams.
Yes,
And I think one more to add to the hot seat is my best friend Nick DeVries.
my best friend too.
Um, yeah, it sucks when your best friend is struggling so hard and
Hmm.
there's really nothing
Hmm.
you can do to help them out. I really wish I could be there for the guy. I think we already talked about this in previous episodes, Chris, but my man's probably not going to have this seat going into next year. Um,
Yeah, I
and
would. I
that's really all I got to say about that one.
Yeah, I'd be very shocked. Um, he has to have some sort of kind of stellar turnaround. But at the moment, you know, he can go race with Mazepin somewhere.
Him, Mazepin, and Nutella Boy.
There you go.
If they just like did, they should just travel the world as like a cover band for like the Beatles or like
There you
Hall and Oates or
go.
something. Like that's HBO's like comedy waiting to happen.
They could start their own little racing league and see who can go slowest around the track.
Yeah, call themselves the Little Misfits.
Cool.
Uh, cool.
Well,
Well, let's look at some stuff off track, Chris. What are some things that piqued your interest this week?
well, I think the biggest thing that's out there, the big news, is sort of the Americanization of Formula One, and this the controversy surrounding these driver intros. I don't know if you watched the pre-show at all, but they had Will I Am with L Cool J, and there was
Two
some
hit makers of our times.
two hit makers of our times, but it was so cheesy. Like they were like half on this like astroturf football field thing, and it was like an orchestra, but they were like just sitting in like school chairs on the asphalt, and just like what felt like a fake conductor, and they're just sitting there announcing these F1 drivers like it's like WWE, and it just felt so weird.
Contrived.
Yeah,
Yeah.
contrived and weird, and the drivers have been outspoken that it hated it. There's a quote from Alex Albon that's saying, when he was asked about it, he was like, "It's the show. We're in the show business now." And I think that's very telling that a lot of them are like, we're here to race, we're here to be racers, and we haven't had to deal with these sort of things. And now all of a sudden we are. And I think a lot of people were worried with Drive to Survive and bringing on new American races that we would turn into NASCAR and the whole spectacle of it. And I think this is like another thing that, like, I'm a little worried about, like, what's going to happen in Vegas, like how over the top and silly are we going to go?
They're probably
Uh,
gonna get Celine Dion, someone left to center. The something to note here is the heyday of LL Cool J and Will I Am is way before Oscar Piastri, Landon Norris's time. These drivers don't even, that's not even in their scope of the zeitgeist. If you have Travis Scott up there and he's like raging and announcing everyone, that would be badass. And I'm sure the drivers would be like much more open to it. But you have a rapper from the 90s and an R&B rapper singer from like the early 2000s. Come on, like what's the relevancy in that? Like, and it's not like you're at a shortage for talent. You're in Miami.
yeah.
So yeah, I do think it's one of those things where it almost seems like the FIA is run by really old curmudgeony guys that are being told what cool is by other old curmudgeony guys, and they're just making decisions based on that. So yeah, I really don't know what the reasoning was to get LL Cool J and Will I Am to, nothing against them, love those guys. I'm 31, so that was during my time, but I just think it's one of those things where they tried it at low stakes, low risk, and then hopefully next year they'll have like Rihanna or something.
Well, I kind of, I get it. There's a lot of history in American sports, like Super Bowl halftime show and other big moments in sport where they want to bring out the celebrities and show off the kind of star power that we have. But I want them to at least try to take it a little bit more seriously. And
I mean, Tom Cruise went straight to the Mercedes pit and became a pit guy, like a pit crew guy. I was like, what is he, 7? How much more can you patronize these people? And then of course Brad Pitt's over there filming the next F1 the Jerry Bruckheimer film, like
and
on location, which is kind of dope. But
yeah, and
it,
Roger Federer was a marshal, so
yeah, him and James Marsden apparently
yeah,
are
hanging
two
out.
peas in a pod. And so yeah, I don't know. I guess like it almost seems like not a real race in that sense, if you see what I mean. Like it almost seems like all-star weekend for the NBA, where it's not really a race. It's more of like a big party. Um, which I don't know, maybe that also kind of took away from the race itself. And I'm curious if Vegas will have a similar effect or not. But it was a funny sight today or this week to see Will I Am and LL Cool J get back to social relevancy.
Yeah, I mean, I worry that um these drivers are gonna like enough is enough at some point, because if the spectacle just keeps getting more and more, then these hardcore drivers are gonna, like Max has talked about, leaving if things continue getting out of control. Now I don't necessarily believe the guy, because at the end of the day you want to still be in the car, and there's no other experience like it. But yeah,
And his dad will probably disown him if he
oh
does.
yeah, of course, his dad has the whip in the back, gonna drop him off at the gas station and leave him there. So um
Yeah.
but yeah, no, we'll see what happens in Vegas, but I think it's going to be crazy, not to say the least. So
Cool. Well, let's put in our predictions for Imola in 2 weeks coming up. Who do you got on your top three?
all right. So we're gonna make a bold prediction here, because I don't know what the current status is, but I read that they were considering canceling the race because there's been some major storms in the area. And so I don't know if this is shifted or not, but we might have a crazy wet race. And I feel like that's the great equalizer. It can shake things up. I think George Russell, he showed he could perform.
Rain Man.
Rain Man, I think think he showed he could perform in the wet better than most. Obviously Max is still really good. So I'm still gonna put Max into the P1 slot, but we're gonna go put George Russell in P2, and we're gonna put my boy Alonso back in P3. So I think
Okay.
it's gonna be Max, Russell, Alonso.
I think they're going to bring Nikita Mazepin back just because Nikita knows rain. He knows rain before rain even happens
That's
because
exact.
that's just who he is.
Well, he only
Uh,
learned it from Gotifi, so
yeah, but if he doesn't make an appearance, I think it's going to be Checo, Max, and I think George's going to be able to eke it in based on just how comfortable he is with the rain situation. So I still got high hopes for my boy, Checo. I really do hope that he makes it interesting again because there still is room in the season for him to trade wins with Max and keep it even. Um, but yeah, only time will tell.
well, we'll see if Valtteri Bottas can go bowling again this time in Italy versus Hungary, and maybe he'll shake things up even crazier than expected. But I'm excited about it. This time I think it'll be okay to have a week off, just to sort of reset, let everyone get over back to Europe and reset with the Formula One mindset. But I'm excited for Imola, and yeah, we'll talk then.
Cool. Sounds good, Chris. Well, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks in Italy. Until then, have a wonderful 2 weeks.
Yeah, enjoy it. See you
Bye,
at
everyone.
race week. Bye.